below the bridge. We identify the part of the rope, or the tail piece, between the connecting link and the turns on the climbing line as the bridge. I start by forming 2 turns below the bridge and then continuing around the standing part of the climbing line in the same direction, 2 turns above the bridge. And I've formed the classic taut line hitch. There are variations of the taut line hitch, but again, we're looking at the classic. Now, as we look, we notice that the bridge enters the taut line hitch on one side and the tail exits on the other side. If we look at the bar of the taut line hitch, it's really diagonal across the turns. Now, I'll definitely want to use a stopper knot here, and I'll choose to use a figure 8. If I take the tail here after it's exited the taut line hitch and I form a loop and then I twist it 180 degrees and pass the end of my tail down through the loop, I can form a figure 8, in this case stopper knot, and you can see why it would be called a figure 8. Okay? It's very important with the taut line hitch, especially in synthetic rope, that we have a stopper knot, because the taut line hitch has a tendency to roll, and in fact it can roll right to the stopper knot. That would stop it. Without a stopper knot, it could roll off the end. So very, very important that we use the stopper knot. Now let's compare the taut line hitch to a pressic hitch. I start in the same way with 2 turns around the standing part of the climbing line. But this time, I'll pass the rope over the bridge, and I'm changing direction now as I add 2 more turns. Notice with me now that the bridge enters the pressic on the same side that the tail exits. And now the bar of the climbing hitch is vertical. I would still choose to use the figure 8 stopper knot, even though this hitch does not roll like the taut line hitch. We believe it's good protocol to use the stopper knot. Now the pressic hitch tied with a tail piece, as I put my weight into the climbing hitch, notice I'm loading only one part of the rope. The other part is relaxed here. These 2 turns will can tighten up a great deal after I've had my weight into my climbing line, and I may even have to get my weight off of it in order to get it to move. Now, some of the things that we're looking for in a climbing hitch is that it will move in both directions when we want it to, so that we can climb and use it for work positioning, but at the same time that it not tighten up too much.
That's right, Ken. Now, I've also tied a pressic hitch here, but my system's a little different. Because I've got an I-splice on both ends of my tail, and the I-splice could be a termination knot, I can now attach the other end back into my carabiner. Now, as I sit into the pressic knot, notice that, and you can see there that I must make sure that I've tied and dressed and set the knot properly. Notice here that both parts of the line are loading. Now, when we saw Ken using the taut line hitch, if he needed to tend the knot, he would pull on the tail. With the pressic, if we need to tension up the knot, we would use the bar and push the bar away from us. If we needed to loosen up the knot so we could slide it down the line, I would use my thumb here to break the bar, and then it will slide easier. Now, I can also form a closed pressic if I were to utilize an endless loop of line like I've got here. I can just take this and pass it through itself once, twice, and I can dress the knot. And you can see that these two are very similar. I can sit down into this, and again, setting it, make sure it'll hold for me. It works quite nicely. We did talk about some of the limitations of the prusik when only one part of the line is loaded. Even with this system, sometimes the prusik knot can load very tightly, and it can be hard to break the knot if I want to descend on it. However, it is a good, secure climbing hitch. Now, Ken, you're going to show us another way that we can utilize the prusik hitch.
Well, taking the prusik loop that Sean made for us, or tied for us a little while ago, I've added a couple of pieces of tape just to sort of hold it together for myself. And let's just look here at the differences. Notice here I've got my prusik on two parts of the rope. That's because for the secured footlock technique, we climb two parts of the rope together, sort of like as if there were one. And really we need to be thinking about it that way because the system changes, and we'll get back to that. But I have added one more turn. If we count, we can count 4 parts of the rope here. I actually have 6 coils here. And to do that, I start by passing the sling around both parts of the climbing line. I pass the carabiner through the loop once, through the loop again, and then I pass it through the loop a 3rd time. Then I'll need to dress the prusik. As you can see, it needed it. Dressing means to align those parts. After we've tied the prusik with 3 wraps, giving us the 6 coils, we dress it, and then we set it.
Now, Ken, as you're using the prusik, it's a different system, isn't it? So it has different limitations.
It truly is. Here, your weight is shared on 2 parts of the rope. Well, here my weight is shared on 2 parts of the rope also, but the prusik is on both parts of the rope at the same time, so all of my body weight is on the prusik hitch.
That's right. Here, only about half of my weight is actually acting upon the knot.
And the other half of your body weight or so is on the other side of the line attached to another connecting link in this case.
That's right. So this is very important, isn't it? Because really you're only going to use that as fall protection as you ascend up in the tree. You wouldn't want to try to descend on that in that system, would you?
Absolutely not. And you're absolutely right on by bringing this up, because these are 2 different systems, and we need to understand the use of the prusik in this application, which is a little more like single rope technique, even though we are on 2 parts of the rope. So we need to understand the dynamics of the footlock prusik.
Absolutely. It's very important. Not only in this system is only half of my weight on the friction knot, where all of his weight would be on that knot, but if I were to be up in the tree and need to descend, double the amount of rope would have to pass through the knot for me to get to the ground. Whereas if Ken were to try to descend on that, only that single part of line would pass through the knot, and he would come down to the ground awfully quickly and could be very dangerous.
So here's a good example of knots, hitches, and in this case, climbing hitches. They need to be used appropriately in the right place, and we need to understand the system that we've built and this climbing system that we're using.
Absolutely. You know, I think Sean is here waiting to show us the clem heist, which might be another option for the prusik in this footlock situation.
Could be used for secured footlocking, and it's a little easier to tie and untie, some people believe.
Okay.
So let's have a look at that. Now let's get back to the climbing hitches that we use for work positioning. This time, I'm going to tie Blake's hitch. I start with my bridge in front of me. All 4 turns that I'll be making around the standing part of the climbing line this time are above the bridge, notice. After forming my 4 turns, I then take the tail and I pass underneath the bridge, and between the bridge and the standing part of the climbing line underneath those turns. And notice how it locks those turns in and holds them tightly. What I'll then be doing is taking the tail, the end of the tail, and threading it up through 2 turns on the back side here. Some people will tie this by wrapping, taking a couple of the wraps at least around the thumb to hold it open, and that's fine. It depends on you as to how you tie it, but make sure that you're coming around the back side and then threading through the 2 turns. I will use a figure-8 stopper knot here. Anytime we're using an open tail, we do that. Now, Blake's hitch, to set Blake's hitch, what I want to do is, as I set my weight into it, I will tug on the tail, and that will set it. Many times when we think of setting a knot or a hitch or a bend, it's about tightening it up as tight as we can get it. That is not the case with Blake's hitch. We want it to be taut and snug, but not as tight as we can get it. That would cause it to jam. So the setting action is a little bit different. I want it snug, I set into it, and I tug on the tail. Now, some of the advantages of Blake's hitch are that it doesn't bind the way the Prusik might, and even the taut line hitch sometimes, especially if it's jammed up against the stopper knot. But also that it doesn't roll out, it won't work its way toward the stopper knot. And when we combine that with other components, for example, a micro pulley, those characteristics are favorable. I don't want to have a knot that's jamming if I'm working toward having a system of tailing my slack with one hand. If the hitch is tightening up and I've got to loosen it, I'm losing some of the advantage there, okay? Now, I just want to look briefly at the wear point. The hot spot of Blake's hitch would be here. Okay, we need to keep that in mind and inspect it properly, and inspect it frequently. Okay, the faster we're moving, the longer the distance of descent, the more abrasion we'll have on any of these climbing hitches. Okay, but keep that in mind. And one more thing I'd like to add is that it's a temptation, and sometimes it can be confused by thinking that you want to thread up through the 2 turns here on the front side of the bridge. Don't be mistaken. Pass the tail under the bridge, in between the bridge and the standing part of the climbing line underneath the hitch, and then thread up through the 2 turns.
Now, using the same Prusik loop that Ken used to tie a Prusik, I can tie a Klemheist on the line. Now, you'll notice that the diameter of the cord, the Kernmantle cord here, is a bit smaller, and we found that that'll grab better on a larger line. It's also supple and a little bit softer, and that'll grab also. Now, to start the Klemheist, what I'll do is take the bight of the Prusik loop, lay that on the rope, and then I'll take a turn. Now I'll take a second turn, working upwards. Now I'll take a third turn, and I'll take the carabiner and pass it up through the bight. Tying, dressing, and setting. Now, the nice thing about the Klemheist, aside from being easy to tie, is that it's also easy to untie. Pass the carabiner back through the bight, and it'll unwind by itself. I'd like to take a look at 2 climbing hitches that are gaining more and more popularity because of some of their more favorable characteristics. First, let's look at the Schwabisch Prusik. Some people might say Swabish. I'm starting here with an I&I split tail. Now, remember when we tied the traditional Prusik, we came to the standing part of the line and took 2 turns below the bridge. We then proceeded above the bridge, changing direction, and formed 2 more turns. before reattaching to the carabiner. With the Schwabisch Prusik, I'm only going to take one turn below the bridge. Now I'll come above the bridge, change direction, and take multiple turns, 2, 3, and a fourth turn above the bridge. Now I'll dress the knot and reattach the other end back into my carabiner. See, now here I've got a 4/1 Prusik. Now I can set it and notice how it grabs readily. Now, the Schwabisch Prusik can be tied with either a smaller diameter cord, as I've got here with a 3/8 inch 10X, but it can also be tied with a 1/2 inch cord. So it's nice that you can go either way. Now, again, notice I'm able to slide it up easily, and as I load it, it grabs very easily. One of the nice things about the Schwabisch Prusik is that even after it's loaded, see how with even 2 fingers I can break the knot and it will release and I can descend. This is one of the nice things about it as compared to the more traditional Prusik, which can tend to bind up pretty hard. It's so nice, in fact, that I can even add a micro pulley here. I'll just take the micro pulley around the climbing line below the knot, and notice here I'm using a pear-shaped carabiner. I'll open the carabiner up, insert the micro pulley in the middle, and then reattach the other end of the line, and this works very well. So now, see how nicely I can tend the knot with the micro pulley, yet it immediately grabs for me. So one of the things that people really like about the Schwabisch Prusik are these favorable characteristics. It grabs readily, yet even after I've loaded it, it breaks easily. Now let's take a look at the D-stool. Again, I'm going to come to the standing part of the line, and